Hi everyone, this video is made for relaxing and sleeping to the sounds of rain and scary stories. I wish you all a pleasant viewing. Here's a chilling and immersive horror story titled, The Corpse Eater in the City, with 9 chapters. It explores a terrifying urban legend that becomes a horrifying reality. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. Whispers in the Alleyways. The city was alive with murmurs of a sinister urban legend. People spoke in hushed tones about the corpse eater, a shadowy figure said to emerge at night, feeding on the dead in the graveyards and morgues. At first, it was dismissed as a spooky tale to scare kids, but reports of missing bodies began circulating. Graves were found unearthed, and the mortuary staff whispered of eerie sounds echoing through their halls at night. Chapter 2. The Missing Morgue Worker. One evening, a morgue attendant named Jared failed to return home. His colleagues said he had stayed late to process an unclaimed body. The next morning, the police found the morgue in shambles. Tables were overturned, blood smeared the walls, and Jared was nowhere to be found. Only a single note, scrawled in shaky handwriting, was left behind, its watching. Chapter 3. The Grim Discovery. A group of teenagers dared each other to visit the cemetery at night, armed with flashlights and bravado. What they found made their blood run cold. A freshly disturbed grave and a trail of viscous black slime led them to a half-eaten corpse. Before they could react, a guttural growl echoed through the air, sending them sprinting back to town. The incident made the news, but authorities dismissed it as a wild animal attack. Chapter 4. Detective Monroe's Case. Detective Sarah Monroe was assigned to investigate the recent disappearances and strange occurrences. She didn't believe in monsters but couldn't deny the mounting evidence: bite marks on bodies, claw-like scratches on the morgue doors, and the growing number of missing persons. She delved into the city's records, uncovering old police reports that spoke of similar incidents decades ago, always accompanied by whispers of the corpse eater. Chapter 5. The Witness. A homeless man named Edgar claimed he saw the creature. His story was met with skepticism until Monroe interviewed him herself. Edgar described a humanoid figure with elongated limbs, pale skin stretched tightly over its frame, and glowing red eyes. "It digs with its bare hands," he whispered. "Eats like it's starving. It smells of decay. It's not human." Chapter 6. The Trap. Monroe devised a plan to lure the creature out. Using a cadaver as bait, her team set up surveillance at a secluded morgue. For hours, there was nothing but the hum of equipment and the occasional shuffle of night animals. Then, around 3 a.m., the cameras captured movement. The creature was real. It crawled on all fours, sniffing the air like a predator. Before the team could react, the lights flickered, and chaos erupted. Chapter 7. Face to Face. Monroe confronted the creature in the dark corridors of the morgue. Its eyes glowed, and its jagged teeth glistened with saliva. She froze as it lunged, narrowly dodging its attack. Her team tried to subdue it, but bullets barely slowed it down. The creature escaped into the night, leaving behind a trail of destruction and fear. Chapter 8. The Dark Revelation. Monroe's research led her to an ancient legend of a curse being bound to the city, feeding on the dead to sustain itself. The curse could only be broken by severing its connection to the underworld, by destroying the relic that anchored it to this realm. This relic, a twisted bone artifact, was said to be hidden in the oldest part of the cemetery. Chapter 9. The Final Showdown. Armed with knowledge and determination, Monroe ventured into the cemetery at night. She found the relic buried in a crypt, but the creature was waiting for her. A deadly game of cat and mouse ensued as Monroe raced against time to destroy the relic. Just as the creature closed in, she smashed the artifact with a sledgehammer. The creature let out an unearthly scream before crumbling into ash. The city returned to normal, but Monroe knew the scars of the corpse eater would linger forever. She became a local legend herself, the detective who ended the nightmare. But deep down, she wondered, was the curse truly broken? The Island of Freaks. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Invitation. a group of strangers received a peculiar invitation, an all-expenses-paid retreat to a private island known only as Carceral. The letter promised luxury, adventure, and secrets worth discovering. Among the recipients were Clara, an investigative journalist, Ben, a down-on-his-luck fisherman, and Erica, a wealthy heiress. Skeptical yet intrigued, they boarded a yacht headed toward the island, unaware of what awaited them. Chapter 2: Arrival at Carceral. The island was beautiful yet eerie. Lush jungles surrounded a grand but decaying mansion. The caretaker, a strange man named Elias, welcomed them with a hollow smile, his eyes flickering with unease. The group noticed peculiar signs: wooden carvings of deformed faces, strange symbols etched into rocks, and the haunting silence of the jungle. That night, a piercing scream echoed through the air. Chapter 3: The First Disappearance. In the morning, one of the guests, a man named Victor, was missing. His room was in disarray, with claw marks gouged into the walls. The group searched the mansion but found no trace of him. Clara uncovered a journal hidden in the library, written by someone named Dr. Oswald. The entries spoke of experiments and unlocking human potential. The more she read, the more disturbing the entries became. Chapter 4: The Jungle's Secret. The group ventured into the jungle, hoping to find Victor. Instead, they stumbled upon a grotesque sight: a cluster of malformed animals, their bodies twisted in unnatural ways. Ben theorized that something in the island's environment was responsible, but Elias, who had followed them, warned them to return to the mansion. "The island doesn't forgive those who dig too deep," he said cryptically. Chapter 5: The Freak Show. That evening, the group discovered a hidden theater in the mansion. Inside were old, dusty posters advertising a freak show led by Dr. Oswald. The performers were described as living miracles, but the illustrations showed horrific deformities. Clara connected the dots. Dr. Oswald had used the island to conduct his experiments, turning people into monsters. As she shared her findings, the lights flickered, and the group heard footsteps echoing down the hall. Chapter 6: The Truth Unveiled. The group confronted Elias, who finally confessed. Dr. Oswald had indeed conducted experiments on people, using the island as a laboratory. When the experiments failed, the victims were abandoned to the jungle, where they adapted and survived. Over time, they became the monstrous inhabitants of the island. Elias admitted that the invitations were sent to lure people to the island, fresh subjects for the experiments. Chapter 7: The Freaks Attack. Night fell, and the mansion was surrounded. From the jungle emerged grotesque figures, humans twisted into nightmarish forms. The group barricaded themselves, but the freaks were relentless. Clara realized the only way to survive was to destroy the lab where the experiments had taken place. If they could end the source of the curse, the freaks might retreat. Chapter 8: The Descent into the Lab. Guided by the journal. Clara, Ben, and Erica found the entrance to the underground lab hidden beneath the mansion. The air was thick with decay, and the walls were lined with jars containing grotesque specimens. They discovered Dr. Oswald's final experiment, a creature he called the Perfection, frozen in a stasis chamber. As they prepared to destroy the lab, the creature stirred, its eyes snapping open. Chapter 9: Escape or Extinction. The Perfection broke free, revealing itself as a horrifying amalgamation of human and animal parts. It was intelligent, faster, and stronger than any of the freaks. The group fought desperately to escape the lab, setting it on fire in the process. As the flames consumed the mansion, Clara and Ben made it to the yacht, but Erica was dragged into the jungle by the freaks. From the boat, they watched the island burn, its dark secrets swallowed by the inferno. Clara vowed to expose the truth, but Ben warned her, some stories are better left untold. As they drifted away, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them off the island. The Doorbell. Chapter 1: The First Ring. It was a quiet evening in a suburban neighborhood. Emily, a young woman living alone, was curled up on her couch, reading a book, when the doorbell rang. Glancing at the clock, she frowned. It was nearly midnight. She peered through the peephole but saw no one. Brushing it off as a prank, she returned to her book. Moments later, the doorbell rang again. This time, it wouldn't stop. Chapter 2: An empty doorstep. Emily cautiously opened the door but found no one there. The street was eerily quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows. As she stepped outside, a chill ran down her spine. On her doormat lay a single black feather. She looked around but saw nothing unusual. Locking the door behind her, she decided to call it a night. But as she turned off the lights, she thought she saw movement in the yard. Chapter 3: The Shadow in the Window. The next morning, Emily convinced herself it was just her imagination. But as she made her coffee, she noticed muddy footprints on her porch leading to her door. She checked the security camera footage but found it corrupted, showing only static. That evening, as she prepared for bed, she caught a glimpse of a shadow outside her bedroom window. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Chapter 4: A Friend's Warning. Emily confided in her best friend, Rachel, about the strange occurrences. Rachel dismissed it as paranoia but offered to spend the night with her. That night, the doorbell rang again. This time, both women heard it. Rachel insisted they check together. They opened the door to find a note pinned to the doorframe with a rusty nail. The note read, "Let me in." Chapter 5: The Stranger in the Backyard. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily decided to stay up all night, watching from her living room window. Around 3 a.m., she saw movement in the backyard. A tall figure stood near the tree line, barely visible in the moonlight. It seemed to be staring directly at her. Summoning her courage, she turned on the floodlights, but the figure was gone. In its place, another black feather fluttered to the ground. Chapter 6: The Hidden Past. Emily began researching her house's history and discovered it had belonged to a recluse named Mr. Harper, who had vanished mysteriously decades ago. Neighbors claimed Harper had dabbled in dark rituals. Further digging revealed reports of other residents experiencing strange disturbances before moving away. One old article described a pattern. The disturbances always began with the doorbell ringing at midnight. Chapter 7: The Warning. Rachel returned to help Emily but grew increasingly uneasy. That night, they heard scratching at the windows and faint whispers echoing through the house. Rachel suggested they leave, but Emily refused. She wanted answers. At exactly midnight, the doorbell rang again, this time accompanied by a low, guttural voice saying, "Open the door." Rachel panicked and insisted they call the police. When the officers arrived, they found no sign of anyone outside. However, one officer pulled Emily aside and warned her, "If someone, or something, is trying to get in, don't let it." Chapter 8: The Door Opens. Emily decided to confront whatever was haunting her. That night, she sat by the door, holding a flashlight and a kitchen knife. At midnight, the doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. No one was there, but a trail of black feathers led down the porch steps and into the yard. Against her better judgment, she followed the trail, flashlight trembling in her hand. The feathers led her to an old, overgrown well hidden behind the house. As she peered inside, a hand shot up, grasping her wrist. She screamed and pulled away, falling backward. From the well emerged a gaunt figure, its face obscured by shadows. It whispered, "You let me out." Chapter 9: The Final Night. Emily fled back to the house, locking every door and window. But it was too late. The figure appeared inside, moving closer with unnatural speed. Its hollow voice echoed, "I've waited so long." Emily swung the knife, but it passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke. The next morning, Rachel arrived to check on Emily but found the house empty. The only trace of her friend was a single black feather on the doorstep. Weeks later, a new family moved into the house. On their first night, at exactly midnight, the doorbell rang. The butcher's last feast, the moon shone ominously over the unremarkable old house. In one of the windows, the faint glow of a kerosene lamp flickered. Inside, the filthy room reeked of decay, never having been aired out. Dust floated thickly in the dim light. Various human body parts hung from rusted nails on the stained walls: arms, legs, heads, and even male genitalia. On the shelves stood jars filled with severed lips, noses, fingers, and clitorises. The stench of rot had seeped into the very walls, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Behind a rickety wooden table sat the butcher, his heavy frame hunched as he examined his arsenal: cleavers, knives, saws, each blade sharpened to perfection. He took great pleasure in admiring his tools before beginning his grim work, the carving of flesh. The screams of his victims never ceased, filling the air with their desperate pleas for mercy. They begged to be released, swearing innocence. But they didn't know the truth. The butcher had chosen them carefully. The ones locked in cages now were destined to become his most exquisite dishes. There were no accidents, no victims of random cruelty. They should be grateful, he thought, that their fate was to nourish him. Rising from his seat, the butcher lumbered out of the room, his heavy footsteps echoing down the narrow hall. He entered a large chamber lined with steel cages. Empty eyes stared back at him as he surveyed his captives. Many hands reached through the bars, trembling with desperation. Some begged for release, others threatened vengeance, screaming of the dire consequences he would face if he killed them. A few had resigned themselves to their fate, curling up in the corners of their cages, silent and broken. The butcher extended a crooked finger and began to count, reciting a slow, stuttering rhyme under his breath. He often did this when he couldn't decide who would be next. His cracked voice broke the tense silence. As the rhyme ended, his finger stopped on a young blonde woman whose voice had already faltered from screaming. Her tear-streaked face twisted in terror as she shook her head, pleading and bargaining for her life. She couldn't accept the reality. She would be slaughtered and consumed by the butcher. He unlocked her cage with deliberate slowness. The woman tried to make a break for it, but his meaty hand grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her back. She fell hard, her legs striking the iron bars with a sickening thud. Despite her frantic kicking and flailing, his grip was unyielding. Dragging her into the large hall where he performed his butchery, he struck her several times in the stomach to subdue her. She gasped for air, her cries reduced to weak, ragged sobs. The butcher hoisted her up, turning her upside down, and impaled her on a hook hanging from the ceiling. The sharp metal pierced her body through the rectum, almost running her through. Warm blood trickled down her pale skin in crimson streams. Pain racked her body as her screams reached a deafening pitch. Tears streamed down her face as her agony consumed her. Returning to his storage room, the butcher grabbed a burlap sack and filled it with his chosen tools. By the time he returned, the blonde was convulsing, her body shaking violently. One quick slash across her throat silenced her forever. Her lifeless face was now painted red, her eyes wide open in a frozen expression of terror. The feast, when the woman's body stilled, the butcher began his gruesome work. He carved large chunks of meat from her thighs and breasts, setting them aside for cooking. The fleshier parts of her torso were stripped clean. Her organs required more care. Some bones could be repurposed for crafting trinkets, while her skin could be fashioned into clothing, perhaps gloves or a jacket. He worked with precision, carefully separating the skin from the muscle. The room filled with the metallic scent of fresh blood and raw meat. Once the butchering was complete, the cooking began. The thigh and breast meat were seasoned and placed on the grill, sizzling as they browned. He boiled her heart and tongue in a pot, adding a pinch of salt and a handful of potatoes. Her buttocks, he mused, could be roasted whole or sliced into smaller pieces and spiced with pepper and liver. Cooking, he thought, was far easier than butchering. The night passed quickly as the butcher prepared his feast. He didn't even notice the time until he finally sat down at his blood-stained table. Glancing at the clock, he realized morning had arrived. He smiled to himself. It was time for breakfast. The end of the game, the butcher ate with ravenous delight, savoring every bite of the meal he had so carefully prepared. Food always tasted better when you made it yourself, he thought, as he wiped the blood from his lips. He had proven this time and time again. But he knew this would be his last meal. The loud banging at the front door had begun minutes ago, growing more insistent with every passing second. The shouts of police officers filled the air as they demanded entry. He paid them no mind. He had known this day would come. Eventually, the world would discover the monster lurking behind the guise of an ordinary man. He could have remained a simple butcher of livestock, like his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather before him. But he had craved something different, something new, the taste of human flesh. For years, he had evaded suspicion. A year turned into two into 5. But he had grown tired of the charade. He had made it easy for them to catch him. The door burst open with a deafening crash. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house. The game was over, and as the butcher finished his final bite, he smiled. This was the last meal of a lifetime. The night Jim, Mavi lived with his parents in a cramped 2-room apartment. After years of saving, the family finally managed to move into a 3-room apartment. Everyone was thrilled about the change, but no one was as excited as Mavi. At last, he had his own room, no longer having to share space with his father. The new building had a gym, and soon Mavi signed up for a membership. He loved working out, particularly weightlifting. However, there was one downside: the membership was expensive. The gym's high-quality equipment and state-of-the-art machines came at a cost, and Mavi couldn't afford to go as often as he'd like. One late evening, Mavi was in his room working on a college assignment when his pen rolled off the desk and disappeared under the wardrobe. He reached down to grab it and accidentally tore the wallpaper in the corner. Curious, he moved the wardrobe aside, grabbed a flashlight, and shone it into the gap. Behind the wallpaper was a ventilation shaft. Mavi's curiosity got the better of him. Without thinking twice, he tied a rope to his bed frame and carefully lowered himself into the dark shaft, using the flashlight to guide his way. To his surprise, the shaft led directly into the gym, specifically, the very one he had visited just the day before. It was late, and the gym had closed an hour ago. The empty room and silent machines beckoned him. Mavi realized that now he could work out for free, as often as he wanted, without anyone knowing. From that night on, Mavi would sneak into the gym after hours, enjoying unrestricted access to all the equipment. His parents were unaware of his nocturnal adventures, as they never checked on him during the night. After each session, he made sure to return everything to its proper place before climbing back into the shaft. One day, during regular gym hours, Mavi cautiously asked the staff if they'd noticed anything unusual recently. The trainers and other members shrugged, baffled by his question. Relieved, Mavi continued his nightly visits, until one night when everything changed. The encounter that night, Mavi descended into the gym as usual, eager for another private session. After about 20 minutes, he heard a strange rustling sound coming from the far end of the room. His heart raced as he peeked out from behind a treadmill. To his horror, a figure was approaching, a man glowing with an eerie blue light. The figure wore a white t-shirt, red shorts, and black sneakers. Mavi froze in fear, then ducked behind the treadmill, trembling. He wanted to climb back into the ventilation shaft, but the glowing figure blocked his only escape route. The figure moved closer until it was standing directly in front of Mavi. Trembling, Mavi finally saw it up close and realized what it was: a ghost. The specter introduced itself as Vladimir, a former coach and one of the region's best weightlifters. A year earlier, While training for a competition, Vladimir had suffered a fatal heart attack during a workout. Since then, he had returned to the gym every full moon to train, even in death. Hearing Vladimir's story, Mavi felt a mix of relief and awe. The ghost wasn't hostile, at least not yet. Emboldened, Mavi admitted that he, too, loved weightlifting and had made some progress in the sport. Vladimir, intrigued, suggested they have a competition. After all, training alone had grown boring, and he was eager to face a worthy opponent. The competition, Mavi agreed, and the two began their contest. First, they took turns bench pressing the heaviest weight they could. Mavi lifted 140 kilograms, confident it would be enough to win. But Vladimir easily pressed 180 kilograms, his ghostly form unaffected by fatigue. Next, they moved to kettlebells, testing who could do the most reps with a 32-kilogram weight. Mavi managed 20 reps with his right hand, giving it everything he had. Vladimir, however, surpassed him with over 30 reps, laughing as he revealed he had been left-handed in life. Taking the kettlebell in his left hand, he lifted it nearly 50 times. Finally, they competed with dumbbells, lifting them overhead for maximum repetitions. Mavi's arms were already exhausted from the previous exercises, and once again, he lost. Frustrated by Mavi's weakness, Vladimir's demeanor darkened. With a sudden burst of anger, the ghost struck Mavi on the head with a dumbbell. The aftermath: the next morning, the gym's receptionist found Mavi lying in a pool of blood, his hair turned white from terror. Miraculously, he was still alive. Paramedics and police arrived, reviving him and rushing him to the hospital. After treatment, he was questioned about what had happened. Mavi, still shaken, babbled about a ghostly trainer haunting the gym. No one believed him. The official explanation was that Mavi had sneaked into the gym at night to work out for free. Accidentally dropped a dumbbell on his head, and passed out. Deemed mentally unstable, Mavi was sent to a psychiatric hospital. Occasionally, at night, the staff passing by his room would hear his anguished cries. "Please, take the dumbbell away. I'll train harder, I swear." My missing husband came home, but I know it's not him. My husband disappeared 6 months ago. He simply left for work one morning and never came back. It shocked the entire neighborhood. Things like that didn't happen in our quiet suburb, surrounded by pristine white fences and manicured lawns. The police launched an investigation, neighbors formed search parties, but no one found a single clue to explain what had happened to him. Our families were devastated. Over time, the posters with my husband's face, missing, were torn down or buried under new announcements. The police stopped calling, their updates fading into silence. Eventually, I had to accept reality. As hard as it was, I came to terms with the idea that Rick would never come back. Then he came back. Last week, I was watering the petunias in the backyard when I heard the garden gate creak open. Instinctively, I turned my head, and there he was. Exactly the same as the day he disappeared. The same blonde hair catching in the breeze, the same bright blue eyes, the same easy smile. For a moment I froze. We had mourned him for so long, but here he was, standing in the garden like he had just stepped out for milk. I asked him where he'd been. He said he didn't know. He couldn't remember a single thing about the last 6 months. Everyone else was overjoyed. Friends, family, neighbors. They were beside themselves with disbelief and happiness. But not me. Listen, I know how crazy this sounds. Our families wouldn't believe me if I told them, and I can't go to the police unless I want to end up in a padded cell. But I know the man sleeping in my bed is not my husband. I don't know what to do. I know I should feel happy, but I'm not. I'm terrified. Let me explain why I'm so sure, and maybe someone out there will believe me. The morning after Rick came home, I made him a cup of tea. He took it with a dazzling smile, just like always. But then he grabbed a sugar cube and dropped it into the mug. That might not sound like much, but my husband never drank tea with sugar. He said it ruined the flavor and would get annoyed if I ever added any by mistake. But this man? He sipped his tea like it was perfectly normal. The next clue came a few days later during a golf tournament. Rick had been staying with his mom that afternoon, but I recorded the event because one of his favorite players was competing. My husband had always been obsessed with golf. He once canceled our anniversary dinner to watch a championship. When he got home, I showed him the recording, expecting him to be excited. Instead, he barely reacted. He thanked me politely, asked if I wanted dinner, and never even glanced at the TV. Then there was the night I woke up at 2 a.m. to find Rick's face hovering inches above mine. His eyes were blank, staring straight through me. "Rick?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. He just stared at me for another 30 seconds before finally smiling and saying, "Sorry, honey. Sometimes I can't believe this is real." Then he rolled over and went to sleep. But I didn't. A week after his return, our neighbors threw a party to celebrate. People from several streets over came by to see Rick, to hug him and tell him how relieved they were. He worked the room like a pro, chatting with everyone, even playing hide-and-seek with Jackson, the little boy who lived next door. But here's the thing, Rick never liked kids. He was adamant about not having any of our own, and he avoided the neighborhood children, especially Jackson. Before Rick disappeared, I had started to suspect why. Jackson looked just a little too much like him. The final straw came the next morning. Sally, Jackson's mom, showed up at our door with a tray of cookies. I knew she just wanted an excuse to poke around and see Rick for herself. I shooed her away, calling her a nosy busybody. Rick laughed, kissed me on the head, and agreed with me, and that's when I knew the real Rick would have lost his mind if I insulted Sally. He had spent years defending her, telling me I was imagining things. He never admitted it, but I knew they'd been having an affair. But this Rick didn't seem to care. I know what you're thinking. Maybe he had an accident, maybe he lost his memories, maybe his personality just changed. But here's why I'm absolutely certain this man isn't my husband. He doesn't have the scar. Rick had a scar on his forehead from the time I hit him with a golf club. Long story, but trust me, it was there. And now it's gone. I'm seriously considering digging up my petunias tonight, just to make sure his body is still buried there. Whoever, or whatever this is, it's not my husband. So, what should I do? My sugar daddy has strange requests. His Tinder profile said he was 45, but he barely looked 30. Looking for a sweet girl. $700 a week. No intimacy required. It sounded too good to be true, but as a broke university student, I couldn't resist. I swiped right, and moments later, Tinder told me we had a match. His message came almost instantly. "Hey there, sweetheart," smiley face. I cringed at the word. Sweetheart. But $700 was $700, so I gritted my teeth and replied, "Hi." His name was Jack. According to him, he ran his own business, though he never specified what it was. After some light chatting, he asked for my banking details to send over the first payment. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. I stared at the $700 deposit notification for 20 minutes straight, expecting to wake up from a dream. But it was real. "You still there?" His message snapped me out of my daze. "Yeah, sorry. If you don't mind me asking, what exactly do you want me to do for this?" I held my breath, staring at the chat bubble until his reply appeared. "I just need you to do me a few favors," smiley face. The way he phrased it made it sound intimate. "What kind of favors?" "Simple things. For example, the first thing I need is for you to pick up a package for me." A package? Seemed harmless enough. But $700 for a pickup? Come on. Even I wasn't that naive. From a post office or something? "No, I'll send you the address." but I'd prefer to do it off Tinder. Got Kick? Or can you give me your number? Kick? What was this, 2011? I gave him my number, and he immediately sent me the pickup address and the location of his house to drop it off. I'm not home, but there's a key under the blue flower pot by the door. Grab it, head inside, and leave the package on the coffee table in the living room. Make sure to lock the door when you enter and again when you leave. I grabbed my wallet, keys, and phone, input the address into Google Maps, and headed out. My phone buzzed again. I mean it. Lock the door. Both times. Please. I found his insistence odd but promised to follow instructions. The pickup house looked abandoned, surrounded by a sagging chain-link fence and overgrown weeds. The whole place was an eyesore, like a forgotten relic among modern homes. You here for Jack's stuff? I turned to see a massive man filling the doorway, his head nearly brushing the frame. Tattoos snaked across his chest and arms, barely contained by his tank top. Yeah. I think so. I stammered, frozen. Wait here. I glanced around, realizing just how isolated the street was. A 21-year-old girl standing alone in the middle of nowhere. My grip on my car keys tightened. Minutes later he returned, holding a box the size of a shoebox, stained and damp at the edges. Pop your trunk, he said. Reluctantly I complied, not wanting it anywhere near my clean seats. Drive safe, he said after closing the trunk. Oh, and one more thing, be careful. Without responding, I got in my car and cranked up the music, hoping it would drown out the unease bubbling inside me. It didn't. Jack's house, on the other hand, was stunning. A sprawling mansion with stone columns and a perfectly manicured lawn. Pulling into the driveway, I hesitated before stepping out. I grabbed the box, found the key exactly where he said it would be, and stepped inside. Locked the door. I almost ignored the request but found myself turning the lock. The interior was as extravagant as the exterior, plush carpets, antique furniture, and decor worth more than my entire tuition. I placed the box on the coffee table and turned to leave. Then I heard it. A phone ringing somewhere deep within the house. My own phone vibrated. Don't answer any calls unless they're from Marvin. I froze, hard hammering. The ringing continued, echoing through the silence. Swallowing my fear, I left, locking the door behind me. We never opened the door for a single knock. Please let me in. It's so cold out here. The voice was familiar, achingly familiar, but sounded older than I remembered. Every detail seemed calculated. Lala, please. Using my childhood nickname? A masterstroke. I sank to the floor by the door, hugging my knees. Of course, this had to happen now, when my parents left me alone for the first time in years. I practically begged them to go on this vacation, for their own good. If I called them, they'd be on the next flight home, but I doubted it would help, and besides, I wasn't an idiot. I heard the knock. I wasn't going to open the door. Think about it, if someone came to your home. They'd ring the doorbell or knock multiple times, wouldn't they? Imagine someone knocking just once. Most people wouldn't. Most would prefer the bell. You'd hear it, step out confidently, and open the door. But if there's a single knock, just one, never, do you hear me? Never open the door. That's what they told us the day we moved into this house. Stories circulated endlessly in this little town. People disappearing or dying mysteriously after opening their doors. But honestly, I'd never witnessed anything myself. I never believed in it. Just some creepy folklore from an oddball town. Not until I heard my missing sister's voice outside, following a single, loud knock. Please. Just go, I whispered. It had been years, but I could still remember her voice perfectly. The moment I heard it, I nearly ran to the door, ready to throw it wide open, despite knowing it couldn't be her. I peeked out the window. No one was there. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen. Finally, I snapped out of it and grabbed my phone. Max. I had to call Max, my best friend and next-door neighbor. She's here, I said, the words tumbling out senselessly. Who? Where? Ruby. Silence. What? He began, then fell quiet, as if piecing it together. She knocked. Now he understood. You didn't open it, right? I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. Good. I'm coming over. Minutes crawled by. Finally, Ruby's pleas stopped. Hey, Lainey, your doorbell's broken, Max called out. Looks like someone busted it. I swallowed nervously. Just knock, I said. A pause. Then one loud knock. I didn't move. Open the damn door, Max roared. His voice rose higher and higher, until it hit a pitch so shrill it felt like my eardrums might burst. I curled into a ball, frozen in place, barely breathing. And then the doorbell rang. I peeked out the window, trembling. This time, it really was him. We had a huge fight the last time I saw her. We sat in the living room, cups of tea long gone cold. I didn't talk about Ruby much, but hearing her voice had shaken me to my core, all over something stupid. Jack, I said, rolling my eyes. A boy? Max asked, smirking. No. A toy. Jack was a stuffed pumpkin. I'd never told Max about the fight. No one knew except my parents. I loved that stupid pumpkin. I continued. Won him at a Halloween fair. When Ruby saw him, she begged me to give him to her. She cried for hours because I wouldn't. My parents promised her a new toy, but she wanted Jack. Nothing else would do. She wanted to be like you. It's kind of sweet, Max said. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. She was a year younger but acted like we were twins, always wearing my clothes, joining my sports teams, trying to hang out with my friends. Now I think it's adorable, but back then? It drove me crazy. Anyway, one day I came home from school and found her standing over Jack's remains. She'd cut him in half. God, I screamed at her so much. She just stared back at me with those big, tear-filled eyes. Max placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Lainey, you were a great sister. Kids fight. It's normal. Sure. Now I knew it was just a silly fight. But if I could go back, I'd give her every damn toy I owned. It had been 5 years. Ruby would have been 16 now. My parents had tried everything to find her, but nothing worked. I think we stayed in this house out of hope that someday she'd come home. In a way, I guess she did. Do you think I'm crazy, Max? He raised an eyebrow. I thought we established that ages ago. I'm serious. Could I really have hurt her? He shrugged. Look, I believe you heard the knock. But I don't think it was Ruby. We used to laugh at the town's legends, before Ruby vanished. Once, Max dared to knock once on Mrs. Telsky's door during a game. Someone saw us, told our parents, and Max got the scolding of a lifetime. His grandfather even told him the legend, which left him grounded for 2 months. I don't think it was her either, I admitted. But someone was mimicking her. Or something. Whatever it was, it's good you didn't open the door, Max said. Better safe than sorry. Max stayed the night, which I was grateful for. We set up an air mattress and watched movies until he passed out, snoring loudly. With him around, I felt safe. Max had been my anchor since Ruby disappeared. Sleep crept in slowly. My eyelids grew heavy. Until I heard it. A knock, one single, deafening knock. My heart slammed against my ribs. Max, did you hear that? I whispered. No answer. Lala, Ruby's voice called softly from outside. It's so dark. Please come get me. Max, please tell me you hear this. I turned to him. He didn't move. His eyes were wide open but lifeless, his body stiff as stone. A scream erupted from outside, piercing the night. Let me in. Panicked, I ran upstairs. Past Max, past my room. into Ruby's old bedroom. There, on her bed, sat Jack, the patched-up pumpkin I'd stitched together 5 years ago. They almost got me. Daddy's coming home. It started with the crash. The screech of tires on asphalt, the crunch of metal wrapping around a tree, the shattering of every window at once, and that strange sensation of flight as my body was flung from the driver's seat. The pavement hit me like a freight train, knocking the last breath out of my lungs. Blood blurred my vision, and then darkness. I woke up to flashing lights and a shrieking siren. The ambulance's harsh sounds rattled around in my fractured skull. I was on a stretcher now. A paramedic with a kind face was telling me I'd be okay. Then darkness again. The next couple of days were a haze. I drifted in and out of consciousness, lulled by the persistent beep of the heart monitor nearby. Pain rolled through my chest in waves, receding only to crash back harder. When my thoughts finally cleared, and I could stay awake for more than a few moments, a woman entered my hospital room. She was beautiful, blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, and the brightest blue eyes I had ever seen. "Hey, you," she said, her face lighting up as though she recognized me. Hi," I croaked, every word pulling at the ache in my chest. "Do I know you?" Her smile faltered. The light in her eyes dimmed. She looked as if she was holding back tears. "I'm Kennedy," she said softly. "Your wife." "My what?" She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. She showed me pictures. Us in Cozumel last year on a 7-day cruise. In one photo, I was hand-feeding a dolphin. In another, we stood arm in arm near ancient Mayan ruins, grinning like idiots. We looked happy. Blissfully happy. Not just to be in paradise, but to be together. As she flipped through photo after photo, a deep unease began to settle in my chest. I didn't recognize this life, this woman. And yet I felt a gnawing certainty that it was too good to be true. Don't ask me how, but I knew. I couldn't fathom having a wife, let alone one as stunning as Kennedy. The more I tried to remember, the more my brain fought against me. I remembered my own face, my parents, graduating high school, but beyond that, nothing. I had no idea where I worked, who my friends were, or what hobbies I had. Thinking about it too hard only made the pounding in my head worse. I must have passed out again because the next time I woke, Kennedy was at my bedside. She asked if I'd remembered anything about us, our moments together, the first time we made love. I told her the truth. No. She tried to hide it, but I could see the pain etched in her expression. A doctor entered, Dr. Barnaby, a Brit with an accent sharp enough to cut glass. Kennedy asked him about my memory gaps. He explained that my brain injury had caused the amnesia. I'd smashed my head so hard into the pavement that it swelled. Recovery would take time. The next day, Kennedy brought my mother to visit, and a little girl I didn't recognize. Seeing my mom, I broke down. The sight of her made my chest tighten painfully, and the damn heart monitor echoed the strain. For some reason, my mom and I hadn't seen each other much lately. Maybe she'd moved away? I couldn't remember. But none of that mattered in that moment. She was here. I asked her to hug me, my voice cracking with emotion. Then the little girl stepped forward. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. "What happened, Daddy?" she asked gently, her voice, her eyes. The way she looked at me, it all hit me like a freight train. She was my daughter. My daughter. How could I not recognize her? She was perfect in every way, chocolate brown eyes like mine, a heart-shaped face, flawless skin. I scrambled for something to say, anything to cover the gaping void where my memories of her should have been. But nothing came. Kennedy stepped in, explaining that I was still recovering and would be better soon. Home. The word hung in the air like a promise. That night, when we left the hospital, the reality of my amnesia settled in. The drive home was a blur of unfamiliar streets and houses. By the time we pulled up to a small single-story house, My silence had become deafening. Kennedy noticed. "It's okay," she said, her hand warm on mine. "We'll figure this out together." I wanted to believe her. Inside, the house was cozy. 3 people were waiting for us, 2 men and a woman, all around my age. Kennedy, however, didn't look thrilled to see them. "This is my sister Violet," I was told, "and our friends Trevor and Poyne." They introduced themselves, shared stories about our adventures, and tried to jog my memory. It helped. A little. Until they started disappearing. First Poyne, then Trevor, and finally Violet. One by one they vanished, not just from my life but from everyone else's memory. By the time Kennedy sat me down to explain, my heart was pounding out of control. "It's the trauma," she said, her voice trembling. "The accident, your brain is—" "Don't say it," I snapped. "Don't tell me I'm imagining people." Her silence said everything. Now I'm sitting in this house with my wife and daughter. Every day, I wonder if they'll be next. If one day, I'll wake up alone, remembering faces no one else can. Or worse, forgetting them altogether. Deep in the sewers, sprinkling Parmesan over a freshly made chicken and spinach tortellini, I dumped half of it into the sink with a frustrated sigh and turned on the garbage disposal. I hated wasting food like this every single time. The only reason I moved into this apartment was the cheap rent. My last savings were drying up after losing my job. It wasn't because of the suffocating atmosphere, the sketchy neighbors, or the mysterious food boxes that appeared daily at my door. Lita had visited on the day I moved in. She pointed out the leaky corners to avoid, recommended sheep roach traps, and taught me to secure the window with a broomstick. Then she casually brought up the boxes. I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. "You need to cook the food, throw half of it down the sink, and eat the rest," she said. Her tone was carefree, but her seriousness unsettled me. Who was sending the food? Why? What would happen if I didn't follow the rule? She didn't have all the answers. All she knew was what the previous tenant had told her, passed down like an urban legend. The landlord didn't even know about it, she said, and made me promise not to tell him either. "It's for your protection," Lita said, claiming that in all the time she lived there, no one had ever broken into the apartment. Was she hinting that this bizarre ritual kept her safe? Shrugging, she added, "Anything's possible." She assured me the food was safe. No pranks, no poison, no catches. Just throw half away and eat the rest. Then she started listing dishes, and my empty stomach growled. I hadn't eaten properly in days. Reluctantly, I gave in. Now, a month later, I had grown used to the delicious meals but still hated the waste. Turning off the garbage disposal, I grabbed the remaining tortellini and sat on the floor to eat my only meal of the day. Even after cleaning my plate, my stomach grumbled. Half a portion wasn't enough. I was tired of following the ridiculous rules. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd eat the whole portion, and I did. For a week, I cooked and ate everything. Nothing happened. The boxes still arrived, and I felt triumphant, breaking what I thought was an unnecessary tradition. As long as the food kept coming, I'd eat it all. 8 days later, I realized how close I came to disaster. That night, I woke up needing the bathroom. As I stumbled back to my sleeping bag, I noticed a strange draft. Before I could locate its source, an incredible force knocked me to the floor. A sweaty, filthy hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my scream. A cold gun pressed against my temple as a sharp whisper commanded silence. Face down, trembling, I obeyed. He shoved a rag into my mouth, tied my hands and ankles, and rolled me over. My heart sank when I met his wild, bloodshot eyes. He looked desperate and dangerous. "Where are the valuables?" he demanded. Was he serious? In my barely furnished apartment? He thought my tattered sleeping bag hid cash? Or maybe gold stashed in the broken oven? When I didn't respond, he punched me. Tears burned my eyes as I motioned to my wallet and phone. While he rummaged through my meager possessions, I shuffled toward the kitchen, desperate to cut the ropes binding me. I reached for a drawer, but it stuck. My heart sank. Before I could try again, the intruder stormed in, gun raised. I froze in terror. Then his face paled. I followed his gaze to the sink and screamed. A monstrous creature emerged, resembling a massive, hairy centipede. Its bristling legs jutted out from an elongated, ink-black body, and jagged teeth protruded from its maw. It lunged at the intruder, silencing his screams with a bite to the throat. Paralyzed with fear, I watched the horrifying scene. The creature's sharp legs stabbed relentlessly, reducing the man to a bloody mess. When it began swallowing his body whole, I gagged, tears streaming down my face. After devouring the intruder, the creature licked the bloodstains from the floor, walls, and ceiling with methodical precision. Finally, it turned to me. I braced myself for the worst, but it didn't attack. Instead, it coiled beside me and rested its grotesque head on my lap like a loyal pet. The knock at the door startled us both. It was my neighbors, concerned by the noise. The creature retreated to the sink, disappearing into the drain as they burst in. They found me tied up and trembling. I told them the intruder had fled. Who would believe the truth? The next day, I discovered an old letter hidden beneath the fridge. "Dear tenant, I moved here to care for my savior, Alesta. She protected me during a bear attack, nearly dying herself. Blind and unable to hunt, she needed help. I promised to provide for her, feed her daily. Leave half in the sink, and she will protect you. Please continue this tradition. It's a dying man's last wish. Sincerely, Callum." Alesta was the creature, my terrifying savior. I prepared a meal that evening, placed it on the floor, and whispered her name. The drain gurgled as her head emerged. "Hi, Alesta," I said, smiling. She deserved more than scraps in the dark. I would care for her, just as Callum had. The Whispering Pines, it started as an innocent weekend getaway. 4 friends, Ethan, Clara, Jake, and Mia, decided to escape the city and reconnect with nature. They chose Pine Hollow National Forest, a sprawling wilderness famed for its towering trees, hidden trails, and eerie legends. "I heard the locals call it the Forest of Whispers," Jake said as they parked their car at the trailhead. His grin was wide, but his eyes glinted with unease. "Why? Because of the wind in the trees?" Clara teased, adjusting the straps of her backpack. Jake shrugged. "Something like that. They say you can hear voices if you listen close enough. But hey, it's probably just a ghost story to keep kids out of trouble." Mia rolled her eyes. "Come on, guys. It's just a forest. Let's get moving before it gets dark." The group set off, the crunch of leaves beneath their boots filling the crisp autumn air. The forest was breathtaking. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting golden patterns on the mossy ground. Birds sang, and the occasional rustle of a squirrel darting through the underbrush added to the serene ambience. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the mood shifted. The trail narrowed, winding deeper into the forest, where the trees grew impossibly tall and thick. The sunlight faded, leaving them in a dim, twilight haze. The air grew colder, heavier. And then they heard it, the first whisper. It was faint like a breath against their ears. "Did you hear that?" Ethan stopped abruptly, his voice a whisper itself. "Hear what?" Clara asked, glancing around. "That voice? It said something." Jake laughed nervously. "Probably the wind. Let's keep moving." But the whispers persisted, growing more distinct with each step. "Turn back," one voice hissed. "Stay," another urged, softer, almost pleading. Mia froze. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore. Who's messing with us?" No one answered. The forest had grown eerily silent, except for the whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ethan pointed ahead. "Look!" There's a clearing up there. Let's camp for the night. Reluctantly, the group pressed on, setting up their tents in the small, circular clearing. But even as they tried to laugh off the strange occurrences, the unease lingered. The forest felt alive. Its shadows watching, waiting. That night, they built a fire, the crackling flames casting flickering light on their anxious faces. Maybe it's just an echo effect, Jake suggested. The way sound travels between the trees. Mia shook her head. No, those are words. Someone's out there. Ethan stood suddenly, his flashlight beams slicing through the dark. I'll prove it. I'll check it out. Ethan, don't. Clara grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. I'll be right back. He disappeared into the trees, the light of his flashlight bobbing in the distance. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Where is he? Mia whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan! Jake called, his voice echoing into the oppressive dark. No reply. Suddenly, a scream tore through the silence. It was Ethan's voice, raw, terrified, and cut off abruptly. Jake bolted toward the sound, flashlight in hand, with Mia and Clara close behind. They found Ethan's flashlight lying in the dirt, but no sign of him. What the hell is going on? Clara whimpered, clutching Mia's arm. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping and urgent. Leave. Leave now. But one voice stood out, a low, guttural snarl. Too late. The flashlight flickered and died. Panic set in as the darkness swallowed them whole. Branches snapped around them, heavy footsteps circling. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, emaciated, its eyes glowing faintly like embers. Its mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, rows of jagged teeth glinting in the moonlight. Mia screamed. Jake grabbed a fallen branch and swung it, but the creature moved with inhuman speed, dodging effortlessly. It lunged at him, its claws ripping through his jacket. Blood sprayed as Jake crumpled to the ground. Run! Clara screamed, dragging Mia back toward the trail. They ran blindly, the whispers now a deafening roar. The forest seemed to shift around them, trees bending and closing in, the trail disappearing beneath their feet. Out of breath, they stumbled into another clearing, a perfect circle surrounded by ancient pines. At the center stood an old stone altar, covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. What is this place? Mia gasped, her chest heaving. The whisper stopped. From the shadows, the creature appeared again, its grin wider than ever. Behind it, more figures emerged, twisted, humanoid shapes with glowing eyes and predatory stares. They were waiting, Clara realized, her voice a trembling whisper. For us. Mia finished, tears streaming down her face. The creatures closed in, their guttural growls blending into a single, chilling whisper. No one leaves the forest of whispers. Neither Clara, Mia, nor Jake were ever found. Weeks later, hikers reported hearing strange voices near Pine Hollow, pleas for help and the faint echoes of screams. The locals say the forest protects its own, and those who enter without respect are never seen again. If you listen closely, they say, you can still hear the whispers of those who were lost. The end.